And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Hello, I'm National Weather Service Meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska Marine Weather Outlook on this Wednesday, June 11th, 2025. And we start with the state of the sea ice. And in the far north, the Chukchi Sea, we are noticing larger areas of open water north of the Bering Strait. Still ice choking up areas of Kotzebue Sound, north side of the Seward Peninsula up to Point Hope. Larger polynya opening along the northwest Chukchi Sea coastline there between the Lisburn Peninsula and Utqiagvik. Still plenty of ice, though, in place along the Beaufort Sea coast, but we do have some much warmer temperatures coming up from the interior over the Brooks Range into the North Slope. Temperatures here through the North Slope will be warming into the 60s, even some 70-degree plus weather going into this weekend, early next week. It's led to the potential for rapid snowmelt, runoff, and flooding, so there is a flood watch for the entire North Slope and all the rivers there, not just Friday, but through early next week through Tuesday afternoon. Now, further south, very little ice left around just east of Samunga there on the northeast side of St. Lawrence Island. Otherwise, this moist southerly flow of air is going to cause what remaining ice is here in the Bering Sea to quickly melt off. Looking at the weather map late this Wednesday night into Thursday morning, there's a weak area of low pressure off of the Panhandle coast in the southeast quadrant of the Gulf. Not a significant feature, but more importantly out here toward the west in the Bering. Not a strong low, but there's a conduit of moisture coming up out of the North Pacific across the Aleutians that'll continue northward and provide just that moist flow of air over the colder waters of the Bering leads to widespread low stratus clouds, fog, some areas of light rain or light rain showers, and that'll continue into the early weekend. Thursday afternoon, we have still that weak low off the Panhandle coast and a easterly wave that's going to work its way westward across the Panhandle, especially Thursday evening and Thursday night. And then still that flow of moisture coming up out of the North Pacific. There's going to be another low come out of the North Pacific and cross the central Aleutians Thursday night into early Friday morning. And this low will actually deepen a bit to 984 millibars. So it's going to keep that somewhat breezy and moist, unstable flow over the eastern Bering into the early weekend. The low out here over the southeast quadrant of the Gulf will continue to kind of pull back toward the south and west. Meanwhile, we have a thermal trough as temperatures are really going to warm here. We have a mid and upper level ridge that'll continue to build the rest of this week into the weekend. High temperatures across the interior are going to get into the 70s and 80s for the warmest temperatures so far this early summer season. Looking at the Panhandle Thursday, look for winds southerly, southeasterly winds 10 knots there within Stevens Passage and Lynn Canal waves a foot or two. Southwest winds around 10 knots here from Ketchikan off of Craig with waves a couple of feet there around Metlakatla, but maybe 4 or 5 feet off of Prince of Wales Island there in the nearshore waters of the Gulf. And as we go up further north, Sitka on up toward Yakutat, outside of Yakutat Bay, generally west winds at 10 knots. And on Friday, we still have northerly winds now at 10 knots, Lynn Canal and through Stevens Passage, waves a foot or two there. Southeast winds, 10 knots there around Ketchikan and Metlakatla with waves a foot or two. But as we get out toward the outer coast, southeast to east winds south of Sitka to 25 knots and swells 5-6 feet. And as we get outside of Cross Sound, easterly winds 15 knots, continuing on up there toward Cape Suckling. Across areas of the northwestern Gulf, generally variable winds around 10 knots outside of Hinchinbrook entrance between there and Kayak Island, waves 3-4 feet. West winds 10 knots within the wider expanse of Prince William Sound, waves a foot or two. Variable winds 10 knots across upper Cook Inlet, including Turnagain Arm and Kennett Arms. As we go further south, winds are south to westerly, as high as 20 knots out of Kamishak Bay on over toward Kennedy entrance, and 25-knot winds there northeast of Kodiak Island in through the Gulf. And then Friday, we expect Easterly winds 10 knots within Prince William Sound, waves a couple of feet. Easterly winds to 20 knots outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance with waves of 4 feet. And then Cook Inlet, winds will generally be south at 15 to 20 knots with waves running 4 to 5 feet. Kodiak Island on Thursday, we'll see west-southwest winds at 20 knots as we go on down the North Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula. Look for southwest to west winds 20 to 25 knots, waves as high as 6 feet. Otherwise, southeast to southerly winds, only 10 knots within Bristol Bay, but as we trail out down toward Cold Bay, 30-knot south winds with waves 3-4 feet. And for Friday, we anticipate southwest winds 20 to 25 knots within the vicinity of Kodiak Island. And then as we get down there from Bristol Bay down to Cold Bay, 30 to 35 knot southeasterly winds, whereas off of Sandpoint Falls Pass, look for east to southeast winds at 25 to 30 knots. And for the Aleutians, Thursday, winds will be southerly to 30 knots across the eastern Aleutians, including Unalaska, Nikolsky. As we pass through the central Aleutians, winds will shift around more to the southwest to west at 15 to 20 knots. And then on Friday, we have a low circulation ahead of it. Winds could be 35 to 40 knot gales. That's the low that'll be crossing through the central Aleutians later Thursday night and early Friday morning. So ahead of it, southeasterly gales 35 to 40 knots in the eastern Aleutians there at Unalaska. Switching around to the west-northwest 20 to 25 knots before falling off 15 knots and becoming light and variable around 10 knots, Kiska back through Shimia. So along the Pribilofs up to St. Matthew, winds Thursday will be south-southeast to 25 knots, 15 knot southeast winds within Bristol Bay, but southeast winds to 25 knots, Kuskokwim Bay, and also through Etolan Strait along the lower Yukon coast, 25 knot southeasterly winds. Within Norton Sound and further north of Hooper Bay, we're looking at southeast winds of 15 to 20 knots on Thursday. On Friday, winds could be as high as 30 knots within Kuskokwim Bay, and the circulation around that low ahead of it, because the low will be approaching just near west of St. Paul. Southeast winds 20 to 25 knots, St. Matthew through the Pribilofs, and then up along Norton Sound, the lower Yukon coast to Etolan Strait. We're looking at southeast winds 20 to 25 knots, waves 4 to 5 feet. Finally, as we get into the far north, winds along the Seward Peninsula, especially west and northwest of Nome through Wales and Shishmaref, southeast winds to 30 knots. Where there is open water in the northern Bering there, just south of the strait, waves running 5 to 6 feet, especially there on the north side of St. Lawrence Island. As we come up through the Chukchi Sea, winds turn more southerly and fall off from 20 knots along the Cape Lisburne Peninsula to 10 knots over toward Utqiagvik. And then along the Arctic coast, look for south winds of 10 knots becoming more easterly by the time you get to Kaktovik and Demarcation Bay. And then on Friday, we still have plenty of ice in place along the Beaufort Sea coast, easterly winds 10 to 15 knots. Coming down from Wainwright and Utqiagvik, southeast winds 15 knots, becoming 20 knots off the Lisburne Peninsula, increasing to 25 knots out of Kotzebue Sound and along the north side of St. Lawrence, or along the Seward Peninsula. And then as we drop on down into the north side of St. Lawrence Island and on the west side of the Seward Peninsula, we anticipate Friday winds southeasterly 20 to 25 knots with waves of 4 to 5 feet.